Have you ever heard a phrase so simple that it completely changed your life? Alessandro was standing in line at the supermarket when a single mother, holding her young child in her arms, uttered words that would mark him forever. I promise to pay when I can. What happened after that moment not only transformed his destiny, but also that of an entire family. If you want to know how a simple act of kindness can change everything, stay until the end and discover this incredible story. Alessandro wandered through the supermarket aisles with a nostalgia that always accompanied him when he visited that place. That market in northern Monterrey was the same one his mother used to take him to as a child, when he would hold her hand and she'd let him pick out an ice pop if he behaved. Now, at 38, he returned occasionally just to feel that connection to the past, to the days when everything was simpler. The afternoon sun fell gently over the city, and Alessandro carried only a carton of milk and some fruit. He didn't need much else. He lived alone in a large, silent house where the echo of his footsteps bounced off empty rooms. But that day, as he stood in line at the checkout, his routine was about to shatter in a way he could never have imagined. In front of him, a young woman balanced a small child on her left hip while emptying the last coins from her purse onto the counter with her right hand. Alessandro noticed her trembling fingers, the nervous way she counted and recounted the few coins she had. The cashier waited patiently, but the line of customers behind her began to murmur impatiently. The child, no older than 3, stared with wide eyes at the candies hanging near the register, but didn't ask for anything, just watched. Alessandro noticed this detail. The little boy already knew not to ask. The woman looked up at the cashier, her voice steady despite the shame she tried to hide. "How much am I short?" she asked, a thread of hope in her tone. The cashier checked the total and replied softly, "You're 50 pesos short, ma'am." The woman's face tightened for a moment, as if something inside her quietly broke. She picked up a can of beans and a pack of rice, returning them carefully. "I won't take these," she murmured, almost to herself. Then she took a deep breath, looked the cashier in the eye, and said with a dignity that pierced Alessandro's chest like lightning, "I promise to pay when I can." It wasn't a plea or an excuse. It was a declaration, a promise made with the weight of someone who still believed in their word, even if the world had beaten him down 1,000 times. Alessandro felt something stir inside him, something that had been dormant for years. Without thinking twice, he stepped forward and placed his hand on the counter. "I'll pay for everything," he said calmly, pulling out his wallet. The woman turned to him, stunned, her eyes wide. "No, sir, I can't accept that," she began, but Alessandro had already handed the bills to the cashier. "It's already paid," he said with a quiet smile, no theatrics or grand gestures, just a simple act from one human to another. The woman froze for a moment, clutching her son, Felipe, who looked at the stranger with curiosity. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking with the emotion she tried to contain. Alessandro shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. Just take good care of your son," he said, nodding toward the boy, who now smiled shyly. They left the supermarket at almost the same time, and Alessandro thought that would be the end of the story, a small act of kindness lost in the afternoon breeze. But fate had other plans. In the parking lot, as Alessandro walked his car, he heard a voice behind him. "Sir, please wait." It was her, struggling with the child and the grocery bags, nearly tripping over her own steps. Alessandro stopped and turned. She reached him, slightly out of breath, her cheeks flushed from the effort and embarrassment. "I'm sorry to bother you again," she said, her breath uneven. "I don't have money for the bus to get home." Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall, holding on to the last shred of her pride. Alessandro looked at her silently for a moment, seeing not just a woman in need, but someone fighting with all her strength to keep her head high. The boy gazed at him with big, trusting eyes, as if he knew this man could help them. And Alessandro realized that this afternoon was destined to change his life forever. "Get in. I'll drive you," he said, opening the back door of his silver pickup truck. The woman hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether she could trust this stranger who had shown her more kindness than she'd received in months. She climbed in carefully, settling Felipe in her arms and placing the grocery bags beside her. Alessandro started the engine and waited for her to give him the address. I live in the Independencia neighborhood, near the wholesale market, she murmured, her eyes down, as if ashamed to admit she lived in one of Monterrey's humbler areas. He nodded without comment and drove off. Silence filled the car for the first few minutes, broken only by the engine's soft hum and the occasional murmur from the boy. Alessandro watched the road while she stared out the window, each lost in their own thoughts. Alessandro broke the silence. "What's your son's name?" he asked with genuine curiosity, glancing at her through the rear-view mirror. She looked up, surprised by the question. "Felipe," she replied with a small but sincere smile, stroking the boy's head. "He just turned 3. Alessandro smiled. "He's a very calm kid. He was well-behaved in the supermarket." She nodded, a spark of maternal pride in her eyes. "Yes, he's very good. Sometimes too good for his age." There was something in the way she said it that made Alessandro sense a hidden weight behind her words. The boy played with a worn plastic toy car he'd pulled from his mother's pocket, oblivious to the adult's conversation. "Do you have children?" she asked timidly, trying to keep the conversation going. The question hit Alessandro like an invisible punch to the stomach, but he kept his composure. "No," he replied simply, offering no further details. She sensed the tone and didn't press. The drive continued through Monterrey's increasingly narrow and modest streets. The grand houses and wide avenues gave way to simpler homes, faded facades, and vibrant street life. Alessandro noticed her growing nervous, wringing her hands in her lap. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She took a deep breath, as if making a difficult decision. "Sir, I need to explain something," she began, her voice trembling. "I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage or being irresponsible." Alessandro looked at her through the rear-view mirror with full attention. "I don't think that," he assured her firmly. She swallowed hard and continued. "The money I had was my entire week's salary. I clean houses, and I got paid this morning." The words came more freely now, as if she needed to confess everything. "But last night, Felipe started with a very high fever, and this morning I had to rush him to the clinic. The doctor said he had a throat infection," she continued, tears now streaming down her cheeks. "The visit and the medicine cost almost everything I had. I only had enough left to buy some food, but it wasn't even enough for that." Her voice broke on the last sentence. Alessandro felt his chest tighten with every word. He, who had lived surrounded by luxury and comfort for so long, had never faced the anguish of choosing between a child's health and a week's worth of food. And the boy's father? He dared to ask, though he feared the answer. She let out a bitter laugh. "He left when he found out I was pregnant, said he wasn't ready to be a father, and told me to figure out on my own." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand as Felipe, noticing his mother's crying, touched her cheek with childish tenderness. "Don't cry, Mommy," he said in his sweet voice. Those simple words pierced Alessandro's heart. They finally arrived at a narrow street where modest houses huddled together, their facades humble but dignified. "This is it," she said, pointing to a small concrete house painted a faded blue. Alessandro parked the car. She got out carefully, carrying Felipe and the grocery bags. Before closing the door, she turned to him with determination in her tear-filled eyes. "Sir, can you give me your phone number?" she asked firmly. Alessandro looked at her, surprised. "As soon as I get my next paycheck, I swear I'll pay you back every penny," she said with unshakable conviction. He pulled a business card from his wallet and handed it to her. "It's not necessary," he said softly, but she tucked the card away like it was a treasure. "It's necessary for me," she replied, looking him straight in the eye. "My name is Paloma, and I always keep my promises." With that, she turned and walked into her house, Felipe in her arms. Alessandro sat in his truck, watching the blue door close, knowing Paloma had left a mark on his soul that he could never erase. Alessandro returned home as the sun disappeared behind the mountains surrounding Monterrey. His sprawling residence in the upscale Valle neighborhood greeted him with its usual silence, the emptiness he'd grown accustomed to filling with work and meaningless routines. He left his keys on the marble entryway table and walked to the kitchen, where he made a coffee he likely wouldn't finish. But this night was different. He couldn't stop thinking about Paloma's eyes, the dignity in her promise, Or Felipe's tiny hands comforting his mother. He tried watching TV, checking work emails, anything to distract his mind. Nothing worked. The image of that single mother fighting to survive was etched in his memory like a photograph he couldn't erase. Sitting on his oversized living room sofa, he let out a deep sigh. Why had this woman affected him so deeply? Alessandro had helped many people in his life, donated to charities, given generous tips, been kind when the situation called for it. But this was different. There was something about Paloma that awakened an emotion he thought was long dead. Perhaps it was her strength disguised as fragility, or the way she loved her son with a devotion he'd never experienced. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the backyard, where automatic lights illuminated a pristine and used green space. He remembered Paloma's words and Felipe's voice. "Don't cry, Mommy." That child's simple act of consoling his mother had pierced something inside him. Alessandro closed his eyes, and without meaning to, ghosts from his past began to emerge from the dark corners of his memory. He knew exactly why Paloma had moved him so deeply. 7 years ago, Alessandro had been married to Veronica, a beautiful and ambitious woman he met at a business conference. Their courtship was fast, intense, full of promises and plans of future. They married in an elegant ceremony in downtown Monterrey, surrounded by friends and family celebrating what seemed like a love destined to last forever. For the first 2 years, everything appeared perfect. They lived well, traveled often, and enjoyed the life Alessandro's wealth could provide. But then Veronica began talking about having children. "I want to be a mother," she'd say frequently, gazing tenderly at babies in restaurants or plazas. Alessandro wanted that too. He'd always imagined one day having a family, children to fill his massive house with laughter and life. But months passed and no pregnancy came. After a year of trying, they decided to get medical tests to understand what was happening. The day Alessandro received the results was the day his world changed forever. He remembered every detail of that afternoon, as if it were yesterday. Sitting in the doctor's office with Veronica by his side, he expected to hear that everything was fine, that it was just a matter of time. But the doctor opened the file with their results and delivered the words that would shatter his world. "Alessandro, the tests show you have azoospermia. It's a condition where no sperm are produced. I'm afraid you cannot have biological children." The silence that followed was deafening. Alessandro felt the ground disappear beneath him. He looked to Veronica for comfort, for a word of support or unconditional love. But what he saw broke him further. There was disappointment in her eyes, a sudden coldness he'd never noticed before. "There are options," the doctor continued gently. "Adoption, donor insemination, alternative treatments." But Alessandro barely heard him, focused only on his wife's expression, which no longer saw him the same way. The following months were a slow, painful nightmare. Veronica grew emotionally distant, turning their marriage into a cold, meaningless coexistence. They stopped sleeping together, stopped talking about anything important, stopped being the couple they once were. Alessandro tried to save the relationship, suggested adoption, proposed treatments, begged her not to leave. But one night, during a silent dinner, Veronica set her cutlery down and spoke the words that would mark him forever. "I can't keep doing this. Alessandro, I want to be a real mother, to have my own children. I can't live my whole life without that experience." 3 days later, she was gone, taking her belongings and leaving only divorce papers on the dining table. Alessandro was left alone in that massive house, feeling he'd lost not only his wife, but also the possibility of ever having a family. He closed his heart, convinced no woman would love him knowing he couldn't give her children. Until that afternoon, when Paloma and Felipe showed him that maybe love wasn't about blood, but something far deeper. Weeks passed, both slowly and quickly. Alessandro tried to stick to his routine, business meetings, overseeing real estate investments, solitary dinners at upscale restaurants with impeccable service, but no company. Yet no matter how hard he tried to focus on work, Paloma's image appeared in unexpected moments. When signing a contract, he'd recall her trembling hands counting coins. Driving through Monterrey streets, he'd unconsciously look for trucks like the one he'd driven her home in. He kept the business card he'd given her in his wallet, pulling out more than once to confirm the encounter had been real, not a strange dream. His colleagues noticed his distraction during meetings. "Are you okay, Alessandro?" his friend Roberto asked over a business lunch. "You been in the clouds lately?" He only smiled and changed the subject. How could he explain that a woman he'd known for 5 minutes had turned his inner world upside down? It was a Wednesday afternoon when his phone rang with an unknown number. Alessandro was in his office reviewing plans for a new real estate development when the screen lit up. He hesitated for a second, thinking it might be a persistent salesman or a wrong number, but something urged him to answer. "Hello," he said professionally. On the other end, a nervous but determined female voice spoke. "Mr. Alessandro, this is Paloma. We met 3 weeks ago at the supermarket." His heart leaped. He sat up straight, the blueprints falling to the desk. "Paloma, of course I remember," he said, trying to sound calm despite his racing pulse. "How are you? How's Felipe?" There was a brief pause before she answered. "We're okay, thank God. Felipe's fully recovered from the infection." Alessandro felt genuine relief. "I'm so glad to hear that," he said sincerely. "Mr. Alessandro, I'm calling because I got my paycheck this week," Paloma continued, her voice firmer. "I've saved the money you spent at the supermarket, and I want to pay you back." Alessandro closed his eyes, moved once again by this woman's integrity. "Paloma, it's really not necessary," he began, but she interrupted gently. "It is for me, sir. I made a promise, and promises are kept. That's what my mother taught me, rest her soul." There was pride in her voice that Alessandro deeply respected. He realized insisting she not repay him would strip her of the dignity she fiercely protected. "All right," he agreed. "Where can we meet?" Paloma seemed relieved he'd agreed. "Do you know La Lupita Cafe near the wholesale market?" she asked shyly. "It's a simple place, but they make delicious café de olla, and it's close to my house." Alessandro smiled. "Perfect. How about tomorrow at 4 p.m.? "I'll be there," she confirmed. "Thank you for understanding, Mr. Alessandro." They hung up, and Alessandro stared at his phone with an uncontainable smile. The next day, Alessandro arrived at La Lupita Cafe 15 minutes early. The place was exactly as Paloma described, simple, clean, with worn wooden tables and a warm neighborhood vibe. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the scent of sweet bread displayed in a case by the counter. Alessandro ordered a café de olla and sat by the window, watching the street. He saw vendors, children leaving school, women carrying market bags, a world entirely different from his own. Yet he felt more alive here than in any fancy downtown restaurant. 5 minutes past 4, he saw Paloma approaching on the sidewalk. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair in a ponytail, her face a mix of determination and nervousness. Alessandro stood as she entered the cafe. Their eyes met, and they both smiled with a blend of joy and shyness that surprised him. "You're punctual," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Punctuality is respect," she replied, sitting carefully. Paloma pulled a carefully sealed white envelope from her purse and placed it on the table. "Here's all the money, Mr. Alessandro. I counted it 3 times to make sure nothing was missing." Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the envelope toward him. Alessandro took it but didn't open it, tucking it into his jacket's inner pocket. "I knew you'd keep your word," he said, looking into her eyes. "Not because I needed the money, but because I can see the kind of person you are." Paloma blushed, looking down. "It's just the right thing," she murmured. Alessandro ordered 2 cafés de olla and a plate of sweet bread to share. For the next hour, they talked like old friends reconnecting after years apart. Paloma shared about her job cleaning houses, how Felipe would start preschool next year, and her dreams of one day renting a better place to live. Alessandro listened, captivated not by extraordinary stories, but by the beauty and the simplicity of her life. As she smiled while talking about her son, he realized something that filled him with both hope and fear. This wasn't just a meeting to repay money. This was the start of something that could change their lives. After that meeting at La Lupita, Alessandro found a perfect excuse to see Paloma again. 2 days later, he texted her, asking if she'd like to take Felipe to Fundadora Park the following Sunday. "It's been a while since I've gone," he wrote, trying to sound casual, and I thought Felipe might enjoy the gardens and playgrounds. Paloma took nearly an hour to reply, and Alessandro checked his phone every 5 minutes with an anxiety he hadn't felt since his teenage years. Finally, her response came, Felipe would love it. He's never been to that park. Thank you for the invitation. That simple message filled Alessandro with inexplicable joy. Sunday arrived with a clear sky and Monterrey's bright sun. Alessandro picked up Paloma and Felipe at their home, and the boy couldn't contain his excitement as he climbed into the truck. To the park, he repeated, bouncing in the back seat. Paloma gently scolded him to behave, but Alessandro just laughed. It had been so long since he'd heard a child's laughter in his car. Fundadora Park was alive with families enjoying the Sunday, children running among the trees, couples strolling hand in hand, vendors selling balloons and cotton candy filling the air with color and sweetness. Alessandro bought ice pops for 3 of them, and they walked along the paths as Felipe pointed at everything in awe. Look, Mommy, a puppy. Look, there are ducks in the lake. Each discovery was celebrated as if it were the most wonderful thing in the world. Alessandro watched Paloma interact with her son, the way she crouched to his level to explain things, how she hugged him when he ran to her excitedly. There was a beauty in that simplicity that no luxury could buy. After a while, they found a playground where Felipe immediately dashed the swings. Push me, he shouted. Alessandro stepped up and gently pushed him, the boy's laughter ringing like music in his ears. Paloma watched from a nearby bench, her smile lighting up her face. When Felipe tired of the swings, he ran to a sandbox where other kids were building castles. Alessandro and Paloma sat together on the bench, watching him play. I've never seen him this happy, Paloma confessed softly. We usually just play in the backyard or the street. I never have the time or money to bring him to places like this. Alessandro felt a pang in his chest. Well, we can come more often now, he suggested carefully, not wanting to pressure her. She looked at him with those dark eyes full of gratitude and something more he didn't yet dare to interpret. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness, Alessandro, she said, using his name without sir for the first time. He smiled, noticing. It's not taking advantage. Honestly, I'm having a good time too. And it was true. For the first time in years, Alessandro felt genuinely happy. Not the superficial happiness of success or money, but something deep and real that filled a void he hadn't known existed. Paloma returned his smile, their hands resting on the bench, almost touching. Sundays at the park became a tradition. After Fundadora, Alessandro took them to Bioparque Estrella, where Felipe was mesmerized by giraffes and elephants. Another time, they visited the Steel Museum, where the boy ran fascinated through interactive exhibits. But it wasn't just weekend outings. Alessandro began showing up at La Lupita Cafe during the week, right when Paloma finished her workday. They'd have coffee together while Felipe did his preschool homework nearby, drawing with crayons Alessandro had bought him. Their conversations flowed with growing ease. Paloma shared stories about the family she worked for, some kind, others less so. Alessandro talked about his work, but avoided mentioning the true extent of his wealth, fearing it might change how she saw him. He wanted her to know him for who he was, not what he had. Slowly, without either saying it outright, they realized this was no longer just friendship. One afternoon, while walking through Morelos Plaza after buying churros for Felipe, the boy let go of his mother's hand and grabbed Alessandro's with complete naturalness. Carry me? My feet hurt, he asked with the trust only children have. Alessandro lifted him without hesitation, feeling the small, warm weight against his chest. Felipe rested his head on Alessandro's shoulder and sighed contentedly. You smell nice, like my grandpa, he murmured, his eyes half closed with sleep. Paloma watched, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Felipe never met his grandfather, she explained, her voice breaking. My father died before he was born. Alessandro felt something break and rebuild inside him simultaneously. For years, he believed he'd never know what it felt like to hold a child who trusted him, who sought him for safety. Now, with Felipe asleep in his arms and Paloma by his side, he understood something profound. Maybe fate hadn't taken away his chance to be a father. It had just shown him a different path. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to give this video a like and comment. Love always wins. It was 2 a.m. when Alessandro's phone rang, jolting him from a deep sleep, blinking in the darkness of his bedroom. He fumbled to orient himself. The phone kept vibrating insistently on the nightstand. He grabbed it and saw Paloma's name on the screen. His heart raced immediately. Nobody calls at that hour with good news. "Paloma, what's wrong?" he answered, sitting up, voice thick with worry. On the other end, he heard broken sobs, the ragged breathing of someone in crisis. "Alessandro, I'm sorry for calling so late. It's Felipe. I can't. I don't know what to do." Her words spilled out between desperate cries. Alessandro was on his feet instantly, grabbing clothes with one hand while holding the phone with the other. "Calm down, Paloma. Take a deep breath and tell me what's happening." He heard her struggle to compose herself, gulping air. "He has a very high fever, Alessandro. He's coughing terribly, and he can barely breathe. I'm so scared, so scared." Her voice broke completely. "Where are you?" Alessandro asked, already dressed and searching for his truck keys. "At my house, but I think I need to take him to the hospital." "Don't move. I'm coming right now, and I'll take you," he ordered firmly, rushing to the door. "But Alessandro, it's too far, and it's so late," she protested weakly. "I don't care. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he cut her off, already leaving his house. Alessandro drove through Monterrey's empty streets like never before. The brightly lit downtown avenues gave way to the darker streets of the Independencia neighborhood. His mind raced, imagining scenarios, recalling nearby hospitals, calculating times. He reached Paloma's house in 18 minutes, pounding on the door urgently. She opened it immediately, Felipe in her arms, wrapped in a blanket. The boy was pale, sweaty, his eyes glassy, his breathing labored. "Let's go," Alessandro said, wasting no time, guiding them quickly to his truck. Paloma climbed into back with Felipe curled against her chest, whispering words of comfort he barely seemed to hear. "It's okay, my love. We're going to the hospital. Everything will be fine." But her voice trembled with fear. Alessandro sped toward the university hospital, the closest with a pediatric emergency unit. The 15-minute drive felt like an eternity. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, seeing Paloma clutch her son, silent tears streaming down her face. "Hold on, champ," Alessandro said, trying to sound calm. "We're almost there." Felipe's cough was a deep, rasping sound that cut through the soul. When they reached the hospital, Alessandro pulled up directly at the emergency entrance, ignoring parking rules. He jumped out, opened the back door, and helped Paloma with Felipe. They rushed into the emergency room, the fluorescent lights blindingly bright. "I need help. It's a child. He has a high fever and can't breathe well," Alessandro shouted at the reception desk. A nurse approached immediately, assessing the situation with professional eyes. Seeing Felipe gasping in his mother's arms, she acted instantly. "Bring him this way, quickly," she ordered, pointing to the doors leading to the treatment area. Paloma followed the nurse while Alessandro ran behind, refusing to stay in the waiting room. They were taken to an exam room, where a young doctor appeared in under 2 minutes. "Put the child here," he directed, pointing to a pediatric bed. Paloma laid Felipe down with trembling hands. The doctor began examining him immediately, listening to his lungs with a stethoscope, checking his throat, taking his temperature. 40 degrees fever, he announced seriously, and significant wheezing in both lungs. "How long has he been like this?" Paloma tried to answer through her sobs. Since yesterday afternoon, he started coughing, but it got much worse tonight." The doctor nodded, jotting notes quickly. "I'm ordering an urgent chest x-ray and blood tests. Based on the symptoms, I suspect early-stage pneumonia." The word hit Paloma like a hammer. "Pneumonia? Oh, God, no." Her legs buckled, and Alessandro caught her, wrapping his arms around her. "It's okay. The doctor knows what to do," he whispered, though fear gripped him too. The doctor continued in a professional but empathetic tone. "We need to admit him tonight for 4 antibiotics and oxygen. He's dehydrated, so we'll start in 4 drip. Paloma nodded, unable to speak, clinging to Alessandro's hand as if it were the only thing keeping her upright in this nightmare. An hour later, Felipe was settled in a pediatric wardroom, and 4 in his tiny arm, an oximeter on his finger, and a nasal cannula delivering oxygen. Exhausted from the fever and struggle to breathe, he slept restlessly in the white hospital sheets. Paloma sat beside the bed, holding his free hand, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Alessandro stood by the window, looking at the lit-up city outside, but his mind was entirely in that room. He turned and watched Paloma, so fragile yet so strong, keeping vigil over her son. "You should rest a little," he suggested softly, approaching her. She shook her head, not taking her eyes off Felipe. "I can't. What if he needs me and I'm asleep?" Alessandro pulled another chair and sat beside her. "Then we take turns. You sleep for an hour, I'll watch him. Then I sleep and you watch." Paloma looked at him for the first time since entering the room, her eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper. "Why are you doing all this for us?" she whispered. Alessandro took her free hand in his. "Because you become very important to me," he answered with an honesty that surprised even himself. In that moment, amidst the crisis and fear, they both knew what they felt could no longer be denied or hidden. Dawn filtered through the beige hospital curtains. Alessandro hadn't slept a wink, staying awake all night, watching Felipe's every breath, every movement, every small sign of improvement or worsening. Paloma had finally succumbed to exhaustion around 5 a.m., resting her head on the edge of her son's bed, her hand still entwined with his. Alessandro watched her sleep, noticing the dark circles under her eyes, the worry lines etched on her face even in dreams. He removed his jacket and draped it gently over her shoulders like a makeshift blanket. At 7 a.m., the morning nurse entered to check Felipe's vitals. "How was his night?" she asked quietly, seeing Paloma asleep. "Restless but stable," Alessandro whispered. His fever dropped a bit around 4. The nurse nodded, checking the 4 and adjusting the oxygen flow. "That's a good sign. The doctor will see him in an hour." As she left, Felipe stirred, slowly opening his eyes. "Mommy," he called in a weak, hoarse voice. Paloma woke instantly, as if a spring had launched her. "I'm here, my love." "Mommy's here," she said, bringing her face close to his, kissing his forehead with infinite tenderness. The boy looked around, confused by the wires, machines, and white walls. "Where are we?" he asked, fear in his big eyes. "In the hospital, my darling. You got sick last night, but you're getting better," Paloma explained with a smile that hid her own anxiety. Then Felipe saw Alessandro by the window. "Alessandro," he murmured, a small smile on his pale lips. Alessandro approached immediately, sitting on the other side of the bed. "Hey, champ, you gave us quite a scare," he said softly, ruffling the boy's messy hair. "Did you bring me to the hospital?" Felipe asked. "Of course. That's what friends are for, right?" Felipe nodded weakly. "Are you staying?" he asked with a vulnerability that pierced Alessandro's heart. "I'm not going anywhere," Alessandro promised, and he meant it. The doctor arrived around 8 a.m., carefully examining Felipe and reviewing the overnight x-ray. "It's early-stage pneumonia as suspected," he confirmed seriously but calmly. "The good news is you brought him in time. With antibiotics and oxygen, he should improve in the next 3 or 4 days." Paloma let out a deep sigh of relief, as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. "But he'll recover completely?" she asked, her voice still fearful. "Completely," the doctor assured with a reassuring smile. "He needs to stay hospitalized for at least 4 days to monitor his progress and ensure the infection doesn't worsen." Paloma nodded, accepting the inevitable. When the doctor left, she finally allowed herself to cry tears of relief, covering her face with her hands. Alessandro wrapped his arms around her, letting her sob against his chest. "The worst is over," he murmured, rubbing her back in circles. "Felipe's strong. He'll pull through." Paloma clung to him like a lifeline in a stormy sea. The next few days were a blend of hospital routine and unexpected tenderness. Alessandro called his office to cancel all his meetings for the week. "I have a family emergency," he told his assistant. It wasn't a lie. Over the past weeks, Paloma and Felipe had become his family, even if no one had said it aloud. During the day, Alessandro brought decent food from outside, as the hospital food was awful and Paloma barely ate. He brought tortas from Dona Carmen's diner, steamed tacos, fresh fruit from the market. "You need to eat to take care of Felipe," he reminded her firmly when she refused food. At night, when Felipe slept and the hallway lights dimmed, Alessandro and Paloma talked in whispers about everything and nothing. She shared stories of her childhood in a small Nuevo Leon town, her mother who passed away 2 years ago, her dreams of giving Felipe a better life. Alessandro opened up about his fears, his failures, the loneliness he'd carried for so long. On the third night, when Felipe was breathing much better and his fever was gone, Alessandro watched the boys sleep peacefully. Paloma had stepped out to freshen up. Felipe stirred in his sleep, his hand instinctively reaching for someone. Alessandro offered his, and the boy grasped it immediately, holding it with trust even in sleep. Something broke inside Alessandro for good. For years, he had believed he could never experience paternal love, that his condition had condemned him to a childless life. Yet here he was, at 3 a.m. in a hospital, holding the hand of a boy who wasn't his by blood but had completely captured his heart. When Paloma returned and saw the scene, her eyes filled with tears. She sat beside Alessandro in silence, and he wrapped his free arm around her shoulders. The three of them stayed connected in a silent circle of love as the machines hummed softly and the city slept outside. Alessandro knew then that biology didn't matter. He was already a father in every way that counted. The morning of the fourth day brought joyous news. Felipe was being discharged. The doctor entered smiling, checking Felipe's lungs one last time with a stethoscope. "He's breathing perfectly," he announced with satisfaction. "The pneumonia is under control. You can go home today, but he needs to continue oral antibiotics for 10 more days. Felipe celebrated by bouncing on the bed with energy he hadn't shown in days. "I'm going home. I'm going home," he sang. Paloma laughed through tears of happiness, hugging her son tightly. Alessandro felt such profound relief that he had to sit for a moment, not realizing how much tension he'd been carrying until he could finally release it. "You'll need to stop by administration to review some details before leaving," the doctor said before exiting. Paloma nodded, but as soon as he left, her expression shifted. Joy mixed with worry, and Alessandro noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, stepping closer. Paloma bit her lower lip, a gesture Alessandro had learned meant she was distressed. "The hospital bill," she murmured, staring at the floor. "For days admitted, all the medications, the tests. I have no idea how much it'll cost, but I know I can't afford it." Her voice grew smaller with each word. Alessandro felt a stab of pain seeing her worry about money, when the only thing that should matter was Felipe's recovery. "Paloma," he began, but she interrupted. "No, Alessandro, please don't tell me not to worry. I know you've done so much for us, more than anyone ever has. But this is my responsibility. Felipe is my son, and I have to find a way to pay." There was a fierce determination in her voice, the same dignity Alessandro had admired from the start in the supermarket. He sat beside her and took her hands in his. "Do you trust me?" he asked, looking into her eyes. She nodded without hesitation. "Then let me help you." Paloma started protests, but Alessandro gently raised a hand. "Listen, I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'm going to administration, and I'll handle the bill. I don't want you to worry about it." Paloma shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't accept it, Alessandro. It's too much. I have no way to repay you." "I don't want you to repay me," he interrupted firmly but tenderly. "I want to do this because you're important to me. Because these past weeks, you've given me something I thought I'd never have. You've made me feel like I belong to something, like I have a reason to wake up every morning beyond work and business." His voice broke slightly. Paloma stared at him, eyes wide, hanging on his every word. "Let me do this," he pleaded. "Please." Paloma closed her eyes, letting tears fall freely, and finally nodded. "But I'll pay you back someday," she murmured. Somehow, someday. Alessandro went to the hospital's administrative office, while Paloma helped Felipe dress in clean clothes she'd brought from home. The clerk handed him the detailed bill for days of hospitalization, for antibiotics, oxygen, lab tests, x-rays. The total was nearly 30,000 pesos. To Alessandro, it was negligible, but he knew for Paloma it represented months, maybe a year, of savings she could never accumulate. He paid with his credit card, without blinking. In whose name should I issue the receipt? The clerk asked. Alessandro hesitated. He could put in his name, but something told him Paloma needed to keep her pride. In the name of Paloma Herrera, he replied, recalling the surname from the admission papers. She's already covered the payment. The clerk processed it without question. When Alessandro returned to the room, he carried the receipt marked paid and the discharge papers. Paloma looked at him expectantly, still holding Felipe. How much was it? She asked, her voice trembling. Alessandro handed her the papers. It's all taken care of, he said simply. Paloma took the documents with shaking hands and read the word paid stamped in red. Her eyes widened. Alessandro, how much? Tell me so I know. But he shook his head. It doesn't matter how much. What matters is Felipe's okay, and you can go home. Paloma set Felipe down for a moment and approached Alessandro. She hugged him with a strength that surprised him, burying her face in his chest as she sobbed. Thank you, she whispered repeatedly. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Alessandro hugged her back, feeling her tears soak his shirt. Felipe watched from the bed, smiling as if he understood perfectly what was happening. When Paloma pulled away, she looked into his eyes with those dark, emotion-filled eyes and repeated the words from weeks ago at the supermarket, but now with a deeper meaning. I promise to pay when I can. They both knew she wasn't just talking about money anymore. She was speaking of love, gratitude, an emotional debt that could only be repaid with the heart. Alessandro drove Paloma and Felipe back to their small home in the Independencia neighborhood. The ride was quiet, with Felipe asleep in the back seat, exhausted but finally healthy. When they arrived, Alessandro helped carry the bags of medicine and belongings accumulated during the hospital stay. Paloma opened the door to her humble home and carried Felipe straight to his small room, tucking him into bed. Alessandro stood in the living room, seeing the place with new eyes, the carefully painted walls, peeling in spots, the old but clean furniture, photos of Felipe at different stages of his short life taped to the wall. It was simple, modest, but filled with love. There was more warmth in those four small walls than in his entire mansion. Paloma returned after tucking in her son, closing the bedroom door quietly. She stood before Alessandro, and for the first time in days, they were alone. No doctors, no nurses, no medical crisis. The silence between them was heavy, with everything left unsaid. I don't even know where to start thanking you, Paloma said softly, stepping closer. You've done so much for us, Alessandro. You saved our lives that night. I don't know what I would have done without you. Alessandro shook his head, closing the distance between them. You didn't just save me, Paloma. You both saved me, too. She looked confused. Saved you from what? You have everything, money, a beautiful house, success. I had everything except what matters, he interrupted, intensity in his voice. I had an empty life, no purpose, no love. I went to and from work like a ghost, came back to a huge house where the only sound was my own footsteps echoing. He took her hands, feeling her tremble slightly. Then I met you, and for the first time in years, Paloma, I felt my life had meaning. Waking up knowing I'd see you gave me a reason to keep going. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to pause. Alessandro could hear his heart pounding. Paloma, he began, but the words caught in his throat. He'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind during the hospital nights. But now, standing before her, everything he'd planned to say vanished. He took a deep breath and spoke from the heart, unfiltered. I know we've only known each other a short time. I know our lives are completely different. I know this might sound crazy. But during those days in the hospital, caring for Felipe, holding you while you cried, watching over your son, I realized something I can't ignore anymore. Paloma stared at him, eyes wide, holding her breath. I fell in love with you. I fell in love with your strength, your dignity, the way you love your son with every fiber of your being. And I fell in love with Felipe, too. His laughter, his innocence, the way he trusts me. His voice trembled with emotion. You've already paid me with love. Paloma, you gave me something I thought I'd never have. A family. Paloma began to cry, but these were tears of a different kind. Alessandro, She tried to speak, but sobs choked her words. He wiped her tears with his thumbs, holding her face with infinite tenderness. Let me finish, he whispered, smiling. For years, I thought I couldn't be a father because my body wouldn't allow it. A woman I loved left me because of it. And for a long time, I believed I didn't deserve a family. But Felipe taught me that being a father isn't about biology. It's about being there, caring, loving unconditionally. He knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. He had no ring, hadn't planned this moment, but everything felt perfectly right. Paloma, all I want for you to be my family. Marry me. Come live with me. Let me be the father Felipe deserves and the husband you deserve. His eyes shimmered with tears he rarely let fall. Let me spend the rest of my life proving to you that true love exists. Paloma fell to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck, hugging him with all her strength. Yes, she whispered in his ear. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. They stayed there, embracing on the floor of that small living room, crying with happiness, feeling the pain of the past dissolve and the promise of the future. When they finally pulled apart, Alessandro wiped Paloma's tears and kissed her for the first time, a kiss full of promises, hope, and pure, true love. They parted when a small voice came from the bedroom door. Mommy, why are you crying? Felipe stood there in pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes, looking worried. Alessandro and Paloma looked at each other and laughed through their tears. Come here, champ, Alessandro called, opening his arms. Felipe ran to them, and Alessandro lifted him, sitting in between them. Would you like Alessandro to live with us forever? Paloma asked, stroking her son's hair. Felipe's eyes lit up like stars. Really? Forever and ever? Alessandro nodded, smiling. Forever and ever. Felipe threw his arms around Alessandro's neck. Yes, I want you to be my dad. With those simple words from a child's innocent voice, the family none of them expected was complete. The following week was a whirlwind of emotions and changes. Alessandro insisted Paloma quit her house-cleaning job. You don't have to work like that anymore, he told her firmly. I want you to focus on taking care of Felipe and planning our wedding. Paloma resisted at first, clinging to her independence, but Alessandro made her see this wasn't charity or control. It was allowing her to rest after years of struggling alone. They began planning to move to Alessandro's house, and Felipe was beside himself with excitement at the thought of having his own big room, a garden to play in, space to run. Will I really have my own room? He asked repeatedly, as if he couldn't believe it. Your own room with new toys, everything you want, Alessandro promised each time. One afternoon, while packing Paloma's few belongings, Alessandro noticed Felipe staring nostalgically at an old photo taped to the wall. It showed him as a baby in the arms of an older woman, likely his grandmother. Want to take it to the new house? Alessandro asked gently. Felipe nodded shyly. It's my grandma. Mommy says she watches me from heaven. Alessandro felt a lump in his throat. Then we'll definitely take it and put it in a nice frame in your new room. Moving day arrived with a clear sky and Monterrey's bright sun. Alessandro hired a moving company, though there was little to transport. Paloma insisted on taking her old furniture, not because she needed it, but because each piece held a story of survival and dignity. This table was a gift from my mother before she died, she explained, touching the worn wood. I fed Felipe here when he was a baby. Alessandro understood it wasn't about material things, but memories and love. Then it goes in the kitchen, he decided without hesitation. When they arrived at the Valle residence, Felipe's jaw dropped. "We're going to live here?" he asked, eyes wide, staring at the grand white house with green gardens and a fountain at the entrance. "This is our home now, champ," Alessandro confirmed, lifting him into his arms. They entered together, hand in hand, crossing the threshold as the family they now were. Paloma cried with happiness as she toured the spacious rooms, high ceilings, and large windows letting in sunlight. But what moved her most was the room Alessandro had prepared for Felipe. When they opened the door, Felipe let out a scream of pure joy. The walls were painted sky blue with white clouds, the bed shaped like a race car, shelves filled with new books, and a huge box of toys. On the largest wall, lovingly framed, was a photo of Felipe with his grandmother. But what sent Felipe running to the center of the room, tears of joy in his eyes, was what stood by the window, a giant stuffed dinosaur, nearly his size, exactly like the one he'd always seen in toy store windows but his mother could never afford. "It's the dinosaur! My dinosaur!" he shouted, hugging it with all his strength. Paloma covered her mouth, sobbing with emotion. "How did you know?" she asked Alessandro through tears. "Felipe mentioned it once," he replied, smiling, recalling a casual park conversation weeks ago. He said when he grew up and had money, he'd buy a giant dinosaur. Paloma hugged him tightly. "You're the most wonderful man I've ever met," she whispered. Felipe continued playing with his dinosaur, creating stories and adventures, filling the once silent house with laughter and life. The following days were filled with adjustment and pure happiness. Alessandro showed them every corner of the house, the backyard where Felipe could play, the pool he'd need to use carefully, the huge kitchen where Paloma began cooking meals Alessandro loved. At night, they dined together in the large dining room, but Alessandro insisted on using Paloma's old table because it has more history than all my fancy tables combined. After dinner, they'd sit in the living room watching movies, Felipe curled up between them, falling asleep before the end and being carried lovingly to bed. Alessandro discovered the joy of reading bedtime stories, tucking in a child, hearing, "I love you, Dad," whispered in a sleepy voice. One night, after putting Felipe to bed, Alessandro and Paloma stepped out to the garden under Monterrey's starry sky. "Are you happy?" he asked, holding her from behind. "Happier than I thought possible," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "Thank you for giving us this life, Alessandro. Thank you for loving us." "Thank you for teaching me to live again," he replied, kissing her head. The wedding would be simple, intimate, in 2 months, but a true union had already happened, sealed not with rings or papers, but with love, trust, and the promise to face everything together. One Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the move, Alessandro came home from a business meeting to a scene that would stay with him forever. In the backyard, Paloma had spread a blanket on the grass and sat with Felipe, sharing a plate of watermelon. The afternoon sun bathed their faces in golden light. Felipe laughed as watermelon juice dripped down his chin. When they saw Alessandro, they shouted his name in unison, "Alessandro, Dad!" The boy ran to him, arms outstretched, and Alessandro lifted him, spinning him as Felipe laughed wildly. Paloma joined them, and the three embraced. "I love you," Alessandro said to Paloma, looking into her eyes. "I love you both more than words can express." "And we love you," she replied, her smile brighter than the sun. Felipe, still in Alessandro's arms, placed a hand on each of their cheeks. "We're a family," he declared with the simple wisdom of a 3-year-old. "Forever." And he was right. Against all odds, against every expectation, against everything life had taught them about pain and loss, they had found the path to true love. A promise made in a supermarket had changed their lives forever, proving that sometimes miracles begin with the simplest acts of kindness. 3 years later, on a sunny Sunday, Fundadora Park was filled with families enjoying the afternoon. Alessandro gently pushed a swing where Sophia, age 2, giggled with the crystalline laughter of childhood. She had been adopted by Alessandro and Paloma a year ago, completing their family in the most perfect way. A few meters away, Felipe, now 6, ran to the playground with the boundless energy of a happy, loved child. Paloma watched from a bench, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach in a gesture of fulfillment. The 3 years since that supermarket encounter felt like an eternity and a moment all at once. Alessandro approached Paloma after lifting Sophia from the swing, taking her hand as they watched their 2 children play together. Life had given them exactly what they needed, a family built on love, not blood. Felipe was no longer the shy boy who barely dared ask for candy. Now he was a proud big brother who cared for Sophia with tenderness. Alessandro was no longer the lonely man wandering an empty house. Now he was a present father who knew every laugh and tear of his children. And Paloma was no longer the single mother fighting the world alone. Now she had a partner walking beside her every step of the way. In that park, under Monterrey's blue sky, the promise made years ago had blossomed into something more beautiful than any of them could have dreamed. Because in the end, true love always finds a way to complete the hearts willing to open. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles exist and kindness always returns multiplied. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that will reach your soul. Remember that every act of kindness, no matter how small, can change a life entirely. Sometimes we help others without realizing they're the ones saving us. May God bless your life with true love, with a family to hold you in tough times, and with the wisdom to recognize miracles when they arrive disguised as chance encounters. May you never lack faith in second chances, and may your heart always remain open to giving and receiving love without measure. See you in the next story. Until soon.